Okay, this section of the video is going to be the outside or the exterior of the truck. So what you're going to do is name off basically everything you see. I like to start at the top and then go down. So let's go to the front of the truck. We'll just start by looking at the top of the trailer. And the top of the trailer is, we're going to check to make sure it's level, it's not leaning one side or the other. That would indicate that we have bad shocks or the load is unbalanced. Coming down from there, you want to check your clearance lights, make sure they're amber in color, properly secured. Your air horn is properly secured. You're going to check to make sure nothing's loose on your hood, like your mirrors. Walking up to the truck, you're going to look underneath, make sure there's no hanging wires or hoses, make sure there's no leaks, any kind of visible damage under the truck. And then we'll walk up a little closer. You're going to check out the grill, make sure there's no damage to the grill, no visible damage on the hood or windshield. Your windshield wipers are in good working shape. You want to go up there and actually check the rubber as well. All right, over here we're going to make sure these mirrors are properly mounted and secured. Nothing broken, loose, or missing. While we're over here, we'll go ahead and check our signal lights, make sure they're amber in color. Headlights are clear in color, clean. We want to check the bumper, make sure the bumper is properly secured. License plate is in date and it's properly secured as well. Over to the other side, we're going to check this headlight, clear in color, properly secured, no damage, clean. Your signals amber in color, no damage to that. Also check the bumper on this side, this mirror properly secure, nothing broken, loose, or missing. All right, let's walk on around the side. On this side, we've got a little clearance or marker light, call them runner lights. You're going to make sure that guy's working, nothing broken or missing. Make sure your mirror's properly mounted. You're going to go over to the door, make sure your door functions properly. Open it up, make sure that right here this rubber seal is in place, closes properly. You're going to check your fuel tank. The cap has a little rubber seal in it. You want to make sure that seal's there. Got your safety chain to keep you from losing the cap. Close that back. We're going to check and make sure the steps are secure. Make sure the fuel tank has no metal on metal contact, that it's secure. All the bolts, nuts are in place. Same thing with your def tank. Make sure it's secure. No, you make sure your strap's got the little rubber piece under it. Everything's good, tight. This handle here, something else that could fall off going down the road. You want to make sure it's secure. We come to the battery box, and we're not going to open that up, but you would tell your instructor. I'm going to take that off, check my connections, make sure there's no corrosion on any of the connections, make sure there's no frays or cuts in my wires. Everything looks good and secure. Down here, this is your air tanks. You're going to make sure your air tanks don't have any damage, any holes in them, any audible leaks. Make sure they're up and properly secured. We're going to go ahead and hit this air dryer since we're right here at it. Make sure everything's connected. There's nothing broken or obviously damaged. Make sure it's up and off the ground, nothing broken, loose, or missing. All right, we'll go back to the back of the cab. You're gonna make sure all your lights are functioning properly. Your handles are secure, all your springs, and all your tops are on there right, nothing's broken there. Make sure your connections are good here on your electrical, right here, both of those, and on your air hoses. You're going to check for any kind of abrasion, any kind of cuts, audible leaks, anything like that would put your truck out of service. You just go down and look at all of them, everything looks good. Check the connections, make sure everything's tight. Over here on the back, you just make sure there's no damage to the back of the trailer. The glass is good to go. Right here in the middle, you got your frame. Make sure there's no cracks or breaks or welds, any illegal drill holes in this frame. Can't be any of that. And then this is your catwalk. Make sure that catwalk's bolted on and secure. Down in the middle, you've got your drive shaft. So just make sure that nothing's wrapped around it, no trash. Make sure there's no obvious damage. Go back over here to the back of the trailer. Make sure there's no damage to the back of the trailer, nothing obvious. Make sure anything on it is secure. Now we're going to go down underneath the trailer. This piece of metal here is called the apron. And when you check under here, make sure there's no damage to the apron. Make sure here there's no space between the fifth wheel and the apron. You make sure all that stuff is secure. All these bolts around it are all in place. You make sure that release handle right here is all the way in. All right, and then while we're under here at this part, we'll go ahead and check our spring mounts. This is the rear spring mounts. And inside, if you can see past the mud flap, that's the leaf springs on the back. Right there where that stick's touching. All right, you're gonna make sure all the bolts are in place. There's no damage to the leaf springs or the mounts. And we're gonna check to make sure that this mud flap is off the tires, is secure. Coming to these back tires, and we'll do the front later in another video. These tires, make sure there's no dry rot around the front. There's no bulges. They're at the proper level of air. You're going to check the air stems. This is called the axle seal. Make sure there's no leaks around the axle seal. All the bolts, lug nuts, everything's nice and tight with no rust around them, which would indicate a leak. Or not a leak, but a loose nut. All right, over here on these dual tires, make sure there's no debris in between the tires that looks like they're spaced evenly. Same thing with this mud flap. Make sure that it's not falling off or touching the tires. Properly secured and up and off the ground. Up under here we have what's called cross members. You want to just look underneath the trailer and make sure these cross members right here have no damage or anything. All right, and then while we're up under here, we're going to check the reverse lights, which would be the clear ones, and then your brake lights. Right here you have an airbag. That's part of your rear suspension. And besides the airbag, everything up under here is going to be the same as the front tires, and the same air brake system as the front tires will be covered in that video. So you have your airbags and you have all the other components, but on the back, the thing that's different than the front is the airbags. Make sure there's no tears or holes in them. All right, and then we're going to go to the landing gear. Make sure your landing gear is up and off the ground. Our winding handle is broken, but if it was there, make sure that it's secured. And you want to make sure there's no damage to the landing gear at all. All right, and then coming down the side of the truck, it has this DOT reflective tape. You want to make sure it alternates white and red all the way down the side of the truck. Right here we've got a little running light. Make sure it's in good working order. It's amber in color. Up underneath the truck, if you look, there's some wires and hoses hanging down. We want to make sure those are up and off the ground. They're not dragging. Same as the front. This is the rear suspension mounts, and you got some little airbags under here. You want to check and make sure there's no holes or damage to that. Coming up above that, this is the tandem adjustments. So you can actually move these wheels, and you want to make sure these pins are all the way out and that release handle is all the way in. All right, no damage to anything. All the nuts and bolts are in place. Same thing with these rear tires. They're exactly the same as the other ones. Nothing in the middle, proper spacing, no damage, proper inflation to the tires. And this is just an air regulator. Make sure there's no damage to that. And your axle seals, you'll check them again, your lug nuts, everything the same on every tire. We'll cover the tires in more depth when we get to the front tires. These rear tires, every one of them, cannot have any recaps on them. I'm sorry, they can have recaps, but they only have to be 2/32 of an inch in tread depth. And they can have recaps. Front tires can't have recaps. All right, so continuing down the side, we want to go to this mud flap, make sure that it's secure off the tires. We have battery boxes for a lift gate on this trailer, so we just want to make sure that they're secure. It doesn't look like they're going to fall off or anything like that. Just want to make sure they're properly mounted and nothing's broken, loose, or missing. Coming around the back of the trailer, we have a lift gate on this trailer, so you want to check to make sure it's up, your door is down. You're going to check your brake lights and signals. Make sure they're all working, your four-way lights, all that stuff, make sure it's all working. You have a bumper with DOT reflective tape, and that tape has to be there. Make sure it's there. And then once again, you want to check your license plate. Make sure it's got a good date. Everything's right with that. All right, moving around the side of the truck, we have, and on either side, it's got these little lights. You want to make sure they're in good working order. On this side, you have the liftgate controls. Just make sure it's in good working order, no damage. Same thing to your hydraulic box. Just make sure that it has no damage and it's up and off the ground. It's properly secure. Mud flap, same thing. Everything on this side of the truck is exactly the same as the other side. This truck has a ramp mount, and if you had a ramp, you would make sure that ramp's properly secured. On around to these tires, everything's exactly the same on these tires as the other side. You can see that mud flap has a little bit of damage and probably needs some attention from the garage. Right here we have some steps. You just want to make sure that the bolts are in place. It's not going to fall off going down the road. These handles, you want to make sure they're secure. This is our smokestack. Make sure that smokestack's secured on the top and bottom. No damage visibly. And your steps are also secure. All the bolts are in place. You can check your door. Make sure you have the seal. And this little runner light, you want to check it. Check your mirror on this side. Make sure it's secure. And that concludes the first video on the exterior of the truck. So we're going to do the engine compartment inspection. And the first thing you want to have in your hand is the key so nobody starts the truck while you're doing your inspection. I'm going to put that in my pocket. What you want to do on the engine compartment is, like always, you want to start at the top and work your way down so you don't miss anything. The first thing really I come to is the coolant reservoir. You're just going to check to make sure your cap's on tight and that your sight glass, you can look through that and make sure you've got coolant in there. The next thing is going to be your hoses. Make sure that all your air hoses and your water hoses don't have any leaks, visible leaks, or anything damaged or missing. The next thing is going to be your radiator. You're going to come over here, just make sure you don't have any leaks or anything visibly from your radiator. Coming around here, you see your fan. You want to make sure there's no debris or anything caught in your fan. That looks like there is. Coming back up here, we don't want to skip anything. We go right here to the alternator. The alternator is properly mounted, secure, has all the bolts. Don't see anything frayed on the wires. I'm going to come over here to the water pump. Water pump doesn't appear to have any leaks. That's this thing right here. Looks like it's properly mounted and secure. Back to the belt here. We're going to just check and make sure it doesn't have any excessive play. All right, that's about all that you're going to have to get for the test on here. There's a lot of stuff up in there, but you don't have to worry about it. We're going to come right down to the frame next. The frame, you can't have any illegal cracks, breaks, or welds. You can't drill holes in it. None of that stuff. So you're just checking to make sure there's no damage. Coming down here, we see our leaf spring mounts. You want to make sure the nuts and bolts are in place. Coming down to your leaf springs, make sure that there's no cracks, breaks, or welds in the leaf springs. No visible damage or bends. Make sure your U-bolts are in place and the nuts are tight on the inside of them. Back over here to your shocks. You want to make sure your shocks are properly mounted. All the nuts and bolts are in place. Doesn't look like anything's bent. Coming right around here, we're going to go ahead and inspect our brakes. And this whole system will apply to every single tire. You're going to have an air line or an air hose. You're going to have your brake chamber. This assembly here is called your slack adjuster. And this is the piston rod right here. That little rod right there, you're going to make sure that it's not bent. And you're going to make sure that your slack adjuster has no more than 1 inch of play. All right, coming around the rest of the brake system. In here, you're going to have your brake pads. And the brake pads have to have at least 1/4 of an inch of brake lining. And here, that's your rotor. You just want to make sure there's no damage to the inside of the rotor, no debris inside your wheel. Coming right here to the axle, you want to make sure your axle's not bent. Make sure that everything looks like it's secured and bolted on. This is also your tie rod. Make sure your tie rod isn't bent or missing. Over here now, we're going to go to the inside of the tire. The inside of the tire can't have any cuts or bulges or any visible damage. Up on top, you want to check the tread depth. The tread depth on the front tires has to be at least 4/32 of an inch, and on the back tires 2/32 of an inch. You want to make sure the tire is properly inflated. You don't see anything like dry rotted spots, bulges, or cuts, big chunks taken out of the tire. Check all the way around. You want to come down to your wheel, make sure there's no cracks or any visible damage on your wheel. All the lug nuts are in place. There's no rust coming from the lug nuts, which would indicate some kind of loose lug nut. Right here you have your hub oil seal. The hub oil seal would be leaking around here if it was leaking, and you would know it because it's pretty nasty. And you could actually check it by taking that little rubber seal off and checking the fluid inside. You also want to check your air stem for damage and make sure there's no damage to that, and that your tire is inflated to the proper level. All right, we're going to walk around to the other side of the engine compartment. All right, same thing on this side. We're going to start at the top and work our way down. First thing we're going to check here is our air filter housing. We're just making sure everything's secured, everything's up. There's a filter inside coming straight down. See my washer fluid, I've got plenty of fluid. I'm going to check my water hoses, make sure there's no leaks, nothing broken, loose, or missing on those. Any wires that you see or hoses, you just kind of give it a visual check. We want to check our power steering fluid, make sure it's at the proper levels. Any hoses, power steering hoses coming out of that. All right, over here we have our oil dipstick. You want to check the oil. You do not have to check the oil for the inspector, for your examiner, but you will tell him that you're going to check for the proper oil level and there's no appearance of moisture or metal shavings in the oil. Over here you have your transmission dipstick. You would check that while the engine's running or hot, but you would just tell the examiner that. You wouldn't have to actually do it. All right, over here on the inside, it's kind of hard to see, but you have your air compressor. The air compressor, all these little nuts and bolts on top of it. You want to make sure there's nothing leaking. All of your air hoses doesn't have any audible leaks. Everything looks good and tight, secure. All right, back down over here, we're going to go to our steering wheel linkage. All these universal joints and everything, this is all your linkage. So you want to just make sure nothing's bent. Everything looks like it's lubricated. All the nuts and bolts are in place. All the way down to here, this is your gearbox. Gearbox is properly mounted. Nuts and bolts are in place. Coming down to here, this thing's called a pitman arm. Your pitman arm has this castle nut down here and this huge nut up here. You want to make sure everything's in place and tight. This castle nut, you can't see it very good, but it has a cotter pin, and you want to make sure that cotter pin's in place. This is called the drag link. The drag link's in place, nothing's bent. This is the steering knuckle. You want to make sure there's no visible damage. The castle nut's in place with the cotter pin. And over here, instead of checking everything again, I'll just say the frame is the same. The suspension, the leaf springs, the mounts, all your air system, you've got the same components on this side, so there's really nothing different on this side that you would have to name for the instructor. So you would just follow his direction whether he wants you to go through it again. And if he doesn't tell you, then you probably got everything. So this concludes the engine compartment inspection. The video is going to be the interior of the truck, and what we're going to do is we're going to perform a safety startup. So you're going to go ahead and turn the truck on. Make sure your foot's on the brake. We'll go ahead and start the ignition. And we're going to make sure that the anti-lock brake warning doesn't come on. Everything's working properly. This is going to give the truck a chance to build up the air pressure that it needs to perform the brake check later. So, all right, we got the truck running. Everything looks like it's going to the proper levels, like the PSI is rising. Everything looks good. So we're going to start checking the interior of our truck. First thing we're going to start is the sun visor. Make sure that or anything above you doesn't have anything that's going to fall on you or distract your driving. All right, going down to the windshield, make sure there's no cracks in the windshield or damage. Make sure your windshields are fairly clean so that you can see. We're going to check your windshield wipers, check to make sure they function correctly. All right, at this time, you could ask your instructor to assist you on checking your blinkers, your four-way flashers, your low and high beams on your truck. Make sure they work. All right, so around here we're gonna check. We're gonna make sure that our seatbelt is on and works properly. It does. We're gonna make sure that our heater and defroster work. You're gonna check all that. All right, going down to the floor, make sure there's nothing. We've got our gear right here in the middle. Make sure there's no bottles or anything that's gonna roll under your feet and obstruct matching the brakes or gas. All right, you're gonna check your what they call the city horn and the air horn. Check both of those. We're gonna make sure that our mirrors are adjusted properly, seats at the proper height, everything's adjusted the way it's supposed to be adjusted. All right, we're going to check the gauges, make sure you know what they're all called. We're going to check the fuel gauge, the oil pressure gauge, making sure the oil pressure is at the right level. We're going to check your DEF, that's your detergent for your fuel. Make sure you have enough of that. Your tachometer, speedometer, and this is your primary air and secondary air. Make sure they're at the proper levels. And then over here, your coolant or your engine temperature. Alright, from there, we have 3 pieces of safety equipment that you want to check and make sure is in the truck every time. The first thing is going to be a fire extinguisher, which is in a different location in every truck. Ours is beside my seat, you can't see it, but we're going to make sure it's secured and that it's in the green, indicating it has enough pressure in it. Alright, the other thing is a set of 3 triangles. You can't see that in this truck because it's under our bags, but you want to make sure you have the 3 safety triangles in case you break down. And then somewhere in your glove box or your fuse box, there should be some extra fuses. So that's your 3 things. And that concludes the interior inspection. We're going to start the brake test, and this is the most important part of the CDL test. So we're going to make sure that the truck is off, it's been running, and our air pressure is already all the way up. But we're going to start with the key on in the on position, but do not start the engine. Put us on the brake, keys on, and what we're going to do is just push both of these buttons in. Make sure your ignition's on and your buttons are in before you start the test. So follow a little acronym called LAB or LAB, and it stands for leaks, alarms, and brakes. The first section of the test is the L, which is leaks. And I've got my foot on the brake, and we've waited for a second to make sure all the air has come out after we push the buttons in. I don't hear anything, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at the primary air, secondary air, and we're going to make sure that they don't lose more than 4 psi in 60 seconds. 4 psi a minute. Alright, so my foot's on the brake, I'm waiting. It's been 60 seconds. Alright, that passes, and the next section of this test is the A, and that stands for alarms. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pump the brakes down, I'm going to pump all the air out of the system. And when this needle gets to about 60 on each one, the alarm's going to come on. And when it gets down to around 20 psi, the buttons over here are going to pop out. So I'm going to pump all the air out. The buttons popped out. At that point, our alarm test is done. We're going to crank the vehicle up. I give it about 1,500 RPMs. It helps the air compressor build everything back up the pressure a little bit faster. But what you're doing now is you're sitting here and monitoring these gauges to make sure that it goes up to about 120 and then kicks off. You'll hear a little rush of air if you crack your window, and you'll know the air compressor turned off. Right, so here the top one's about done. Now the bottom one's coming up. Sometimes these go together. couldn't hear it, but I heard the little rush of air indicating that we're full. Okay, so this is the part of the test that is the B of lab. We're going to test all the brakes. In order to do that, we're going to go to the buttons, and it doesn't matter which one you start with. You can push in the red one or you can push in the yellow one. But this is the tractor supply. This is the trailer supply. If you're going to check the tractor, you're going to go ahead and push in the brake of the trailer. Alright? It's backwards. We're going to push that button in on a Peterbilt. It's not going to go in gear, and that tells me my brakes are working on the tractor. Okay? We're going to check the other one, so pull that out, push the yellow one in, we put it in drive, and now we're going to tug against the trailer. Tugging, it doesn't move, so we know the trailer brakes work. Last part of this, make sure both brakes are in, both buttons are in, and we're going to roll forward, put the truck in drive, roll forward about maybe 10 feet, lightly tap the brakes, the truck stops together. That's a brake systems check. And at that point, you can pull the air brakes and look at your instructor and tell him you're done.